Good evening, welcome to the Per Report. I'm Diana Lin. There's nothing like an ice-cold beer on a sizzling summer day. Hong Kongers quaffed more than 8 million litres of beer last year, more than 80% imports. Now, a handful of local brewers are stirring things up. Producer Erica Poon finds out what all the froth is about.
I think that beer is very social, and there are so many different styles. I think it's very creative.
The mass beers tend to be all about the marketing, less about the product.
Alcohol is a toxin to human beings. Drink it moderately.
Craft beer in general is about enjoying the flavor profile. It's not about consumption of copious amounts of alcohol to get drunk.
I really seen big growth in the interest of craft beer.
My name is Simon Pesh, and I'm 44 years old. Moved to Hong Kong in January. I'm from San Francisco. I've been working for a large brewery in the Bay Area for the last 17 years.
He's now the brewmaster for a local brewery that started production in March.
When you're making beer, it's very important that you're very, very clean. It's very important for us to not propagate bacteria that could potentially make beer taste bad. We will clean a tank after every single use. We get our grain from Germany. We mill the grain so that the enzymes on the husk of the kernel of the barley is more easily accessible to the starches in the kernel of the barley. And the enzymes convert starches to sugars in the mash cooker.
Where the milled grain is mixed with water at about 70 degrees Celsius.
The lower the temperature, the more dry a beer would be. What we're doing is observing clarity. We'll know when to stop circulating once we achieve clarity.
After about an hour, water is added one last time here to extract sugars from the grain. The barley sugar and water mixture, called the wort, is filtered through a stainless steel screen. Then the wort goes to the kettle where it boils for an hour.
So we add hops at 3 different times during the boil. A hop is a kind of an herb. The hops that we're using are from the United States. We add hops in the beginning for bitterness, in the middle for flavor, and then for aromatics at the very end.
After boiling, the wort gets cooled down through a heat exchanger. It goes through a tube to the fermenter, where it's mixed with yeast.
We will ferment for about a week. This is what our mash looks like after we have extracted with water, extracted all of the sugar. It's great animal feed. This material goes sour in half a day. So in order for this to be valuable to the farmer, they really need to pick it up fresh, and their schedule has to match ours. We're brewing on a consistent basis about twice a week.
Each brew makes up to 2,200 liters, and that's nearly 5,000 bottles, or up to about 64 kegs.
We're doing mainly ales in this brewery. Ales and lagers, they use different yeast strains. Lagers usually are maybe a little smoother. Ales are a little more fruity. Yeast actually has a flavor of its own. For our preference, we choose to filter the yeast out. Beer can be made a lot of different ways. We're using only 4 components: barley, water, yeast, and hops.
Craft brewers tend to use the best products that they possibly can. What a lot of the mass brewers do is they use adjuncts, they use things like rice that creates cheap alcohol, generally without flavor. And what they do is add flavor back in with different additives.
Toby Cooper runs this restaurant bar in Soho.
We have about at least 150 beers. We have 18 beers on tap, which about half of those change weekly. The beer bottle selection, there's new beers every week. We tend not to have a lot of the big beers, because what we'd like to do is open people up to trying more things. We've had very few people leave because we don't have their brand of beer. We don't actually import anything ourselves because we only generally deal with small quantities. So we have a lot of distributors that we work with. The variety in the Hong Kong market has changed enormously over the last 4 years. When we opened here 4 years ago, we couldn't fill our fridge with good beer. And now we have to rotate so much because there's so much on the market.
Toby says the craft beer market here is rising as part of an international trend.
The opportunity in Asia is very large right now for the craft brewing industry. I think that there are more and more younger people that are interested in trends.
A local survey shows nearly 10% of Hong Kongers aged 18 to 24 binge drank in 2012, up from about 7% in 2010.
In the short term, alcohol is a depressant on our central nervous system, and that would prompt us to more accident, or even they may affect our emotion. In long run, if we drink it regularly and in large amount, we will have more risk of liver disease. That will affect our cardiovascular system as well. Alcohol is the same, whether it is from beer or from any other kind of beverages. Be sensible to control the intake.
Hong Kong recommends no more than 2 standard drinks for men and 1 standard drink for women a day. And that's 3/4 of a can of beer with 5% alcohol, or 100 milliliters of wine, or 30 milliliters of hard liquor with 40% alcohol.
I think everything must be enjoyed in moderation and responsibly. In craft beer, just the general philosophy is about enjoying the flavor profile. I'm Rohit Dugar. I'm 34 years old. I'm currently owner-operator of a microbrewery in Hong Kong.
On this day, he teams up with Toby to organize a food and beer pairing.
Food pairing-wise, I think beer is incredibly good and underappreciated.
We basically try and show people what we have and how versatile beer is.
I just had the soba beer with the soba noodle. Both were light and refreshing on this scorching hot day. You come in, and the first course, you get a really cold, delicate, earthy beer paired with cold, earthy, grainy noodles. So guys, this beer, it's a Belgian-style, wheat beer, is made with unmalted wheat, dried mandarin peels with a blend of 5 different spices. Should work really well with this dish. There are some things to avoid. For example, if we did this dish, which has a bit of acidity and citrus component, and we paired it with something malty and rich like a rye beer, it's just that, 2 strong flavors that don't work together too well. My first experience with beer was in college, actually, and the majority of it was big brands.
His view changed after leaving Singapore, where he studied university, for the US.
I sort of saw local breweries producing really high quality, extremely fresh beer. One of the first beers I had in the US, it was aromatic, it was rich and malty tasting and very different from anything I'd tasted before.
Rohit worked as an investment banker in New York before relocating to Hong Kong in 2011.
And I was shocked that there's no good local brewery. I found myself, on weekends and things like that, just searching for good beer and thinking that somebody should do something about it.
So he quit his banking job.
In May of last year, that I formally placed order for equipment. The equipment got here in October.
And he started brewing ale.
We adjust the water for every beer we make. Some brewers would argue that the difference is fairly subtle, but we think it makes a difference. We are very lucky in Hong Kong that we have very low mineral water. We see it as a blank slate. After mashing, the entire thing is moved to the second tank,
where the wort is separated from the spent grain. The wort then goes back to the first tank for boiling.
And then we transfer the liquid to the third tank called the whirlpool, where we separate the liquid from basically hop residue, and during boiling some of the protein content of the grain coagulates. So those are solids that are just separated out from the rest of the liquid.
The wort then goes to the fermenter and is mixed with yeast. Rohit brews 5 to 6 different types of beer. His beers range from 135 to 300 calories.
Although the alcohol gives us calories, it doesn't give us any nutrients, so we call it empty calories. If we have too much alcohol intake, definitely we may gain weight.
For now, Rohit's beers are available in kegs or on tap.
Bottling requires a lot of space and capital investment. The majority of our clients, they like having the draft option anyway. It's more visible in bars and restaurants. Most of our beers are meant to be consumed as fresh as possible when they're kept cold at all times. Average shelf life is around 6 months, but our beer tends to run out in a matter of weeks.
Some beers he's maturing.
For a beer to be age-worthy, it needs to be higher in alcohol and have deep, complex flavors. So the beer we are aging is an 11.5% alcohol beer brewed with a certain amount of rye and some darker roasted malts. We are aging it in rye whiskey barrels. These barrels were used to make rye whiskey, so they have some residual rye whiskey flavor and a lot of oak flavor still left. Our best estimate right now is that we'll age for a total of 6 to 7 months. The most satisfying is that we're finally able to bring good quality, diverse, fresh beer to Hong Kong, which hopefully turns into Hong Kong evolving its own brewing identity.
Coming up,
the first batch of my beer tastes actually better than some of the beers that I bought from outside.
More of what I'm brewing is something that can be savored.
the fizz about home brewing.
Beers for Books. By having a drink, you're actually giving the opportunity to a kid in another country to have a chance to learn to read and write.
And beer and charity. That and more after the break.